can describe all of them.
Please move to the side of the car and put your hands on the hood.
Why? What's with you guys?
You heard what he said, sir. Do it right now, please.
What kind of shit is this, man? Hold up. Wait a second. You guys are arresting me for getting thrown out of a fucking window? I got thrown out of a window, man.
I'm Zach Bennett. I was born in 1981, but somehow I missed out on seeing the greatest movies of the 1980s. So I'm fixing that. I'm gonna watch these great films and talk about them with my friends who have loved them for decades. This is Video Oblivious. Episode 7, 1984's Beverly Hills Cop. It's the fish out of water tale of a police officer, young and arrogant, who finds himself traveling across the country to solve the murder of his best friend. We're talking about 1984's Beverly Hills Cop. Welcome in. I'm Zach Bennett. My co-host this week is Michael Yeager. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Zach. How are you, man?
I'm great. How are you?
Good, man. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Let's get into how we know each other. Actually, we know each other through our lovely wives.
Through our wives, yes.
They worked together in an office at a medical facility, and they introduced you and I to each other.
At a medical facility. Yeah, that sounds strange. At a medical facility.
That's what I try to
it's
tell
like a
people.
movie at a medical facility.
It's a doctor's office.
Yeah, doctor's office.
A very, very large doctor's office. But that's where they got to know each other and then introduced us. And I have put my life into your hands already at least once.
The very first time you met me, your wife and your life were in my hands. Yes.
Let's explain what that means.
Yeah. So we went to a baseball game. You're an avid Atlanta Braves fan with season tickets. And my wife and your wife decided to say, let's go to a Braves game. My husband will fly. He's a pilot, which is what my wife tends to do as a leading question to anything that I am involved in. My husband's a pilot. He can take us there. So, yeah, we went to a Braves game. What was it, in July, August, towards the end, September, towards the end of the season?
Yeah, I think it was early September.
Yeah, we picked you guys up at the Smyrna Airport here just south of Nashville, and like you said, your life was in my hands as we flew down to Atlanta, probably the busiest airspace in the United States of America, and you trusted me doing it, and we had a blast.
We did. We had a really good time, and I learned a lot about aviation. It's always been something that I've been interested in, and you let me handle the iPad and find out where all the other planes were, so make sure we
I told you watch out for traffic so we didn't run into anybody, which is a very important job to have. Even my kids have that important job when they're in the airplane of looking for other airplanes so we don't run into them.
It was a lot of fun. And I remember one in particular, I said, oh, it looks like a Delta one's coming straight for us. You're like, he's like 20,000 feet above us. Nothing to worry.
Yeah, wasn't going to be a huge issue. Yeah. And then we ran into weather on the way home, so we were dodging thunderstorms and all that stuff in the evening time. And there was a Falcons game, I think, going on that same weekend. It was the beginning of the season, and we saw like the cavalcade of people coming into that airport we were at, and it was like SUVs and security guards escorting people out. It was like a police motor escort. It was pretty wild.
It was fun. It was a really, really fun weekend. So thank you for that experience.
It was fun anytime.
All right, so let's talk about Beverly Hills Cop. Let's get into that. It was a movie that came out in 1984, right at the end of 1984.
End of 84.
And it became the biggest hit of 1984, which is interesting on the podcast. This is, I think, the 8th episode I've done, 7th or 8th. And every other film I've done so far has been from the year 1984, and it wasn't by design. It's just, I guess that's the year that I missed so many movies because I was only 3 years old when all those movies came out, and I just never got around to seeing them. So let's get into your background a little bit. How old are you? Where'd you grow up? Only child, siblings? Like, what led you to fall in love with Beverly Hills Cop as a youngster?
So for me, like, I was a year old when this movie came out. I was born in 83, so I'm 40. And, I grew up in Texas. I'm a sibling of 3. So I have an older sister who was born in 74 and an older brother who was born in 81. And then, son of a police officer. So any movie from the 80s that came out that was kind of like that cop, I was instantly drawn to. Any kind of police procedural buddy cop movie, I was immediately drawn to. With my dad being a cop, my mother was a hairstylist, so she owned her own business in Texas. And like this movie for me, it kind of any movie in the 80s, whether it was Lethal Weapon, which you did around Christmas time, or this one, it kind of gravitated to. as a kid growing up. So yeah.
And this movie, and Audrey had never seen it either when we were watching it. So
All
we
right,
watched
so this will be
it.
interesting.
We watched it together for the first time, and we both noted this was kind of the movie we thought Lethal Weapon was going to be.
Okay, the more kind of comedy-driven, comedy-centric.
Yeah. But it wound up being... and I enjoyed Lethal Weapon. I think I enjoyed Beverly Hills Cop more. I don't usually reveal that early in the podcast, but I really did. But yeah, that's interesting that your dad was a cop. Do you think that's what led you to be interested in cop stuff?
Probably. However, with that being said, my dad, as a patrol officer and later went on to serve warrants and that kind of stuff later on in his career, any cop movie we watched or police procedural we watched, with the exception of the Cops TV show, it was like, that would never happen. It doesn't go like that. If it wasn't proper procedure for him, he'd look at it and go, nah, whatever. That wasn't the way it was.
What did he think of this movie?
I asked him the other day when I told him I was doing this podcast, and he was like, I don't think I really remember that. Like, I remember Eddie Murphy, and I think I remember the plot of the movie, but I don't remember if I liked it or not. I'd have to watch it again, which my dad's not the type of person to watch it, like specific movies over and over again. Like, he has his classics, like during Christmas, it's Christmas Vacation nonstop. But this one, probably not one that's like in his go-to. For me and my wife, this series is a go-to probably on a yearly basis. Like, we have a thing during the summertime, like when TV is like at a standstill and there's nothing coming out streaming on any of the new platforms, we usually will watch sequels because it's the easiest thing to go to, other than, we've been married for 20 years, we've seen everything. It's always, what do you want to watch? Well, I don't know. What do you want to watch? So we'll just pick a series of movies and we'll watch all of them until they're done. Oh. And that's kind of the way we do that. And for us, this is probably a yearly watch for us. Very because cool. It's good.
Very cool. Yeah, it was a good movie, and we'll dive more deeply into it. It was Paramount was the studio. It was again released December 5th, 1984, and we're talking about a massive hit. It wound up being the highest grossing movie of 1984. It was the 11th highest grossing R-rated movie ever, and maintains that position. It's probably been bumped down the list. It's probably higher up on that list.
If I remember the fact correctly, I think it held the highest grossing R-rated movie for almost 20 years. Wow. 19 years until 2004, I think, or 2003, it was kicked out by The Matrix Reloaded.
That's not a surprise.
Which is, I mean, I don't know, I wasn't a Reloaded fan. So I like the original Matrix was awesome, but I don't know, the Reloaded one, I was kind of like, I don't know.
I've never seen any.
No, okay, all right. Now we're getting somewhere deep.
I've seen part of the first one, and I know the story, but I never was really interested in watching those movies. But yeah, that's interesting, and especially considering the fact that movies make more money now because they charge more money and inflation and everything. Those numbers, if you adjusted those numbers for inflation, it would probably still be in the top 2 or 3 highest grossing R-rated movies ever. It made in 1984 an astounding $234 million domestically, and about another $80 million on top of that around the world. And it was made on a $13 million budget, which is a pretty high budget for a lot of these movies made in '84. Some of these other movies that I've been covering are with $4 and $5 million budgets. So this had a pretty high budget for that time period.
Yeah, I looked at $13 million, and so I adjusted that for inflation in what is now 2024, and I think that's a $35 million budget. And if you look at the average budget of a movie in 2023, I think it's something like $300 million. Yeah. So there's a huge contrast in between like how much money they put into this movie even then versus what you got out of it versus now.
It was the number 1 movie for its first 13 weeks in release, and that was well into 1985, and only fell behind the movie Witness by about $80,000 for one of those weeks. So it was, for 14 out of 15 weeks, the number 1 movie in the country.
Harrison Ford.
And Eddie Murphy was already a bankable star by this point. He had already been in 48 Hours. He had already been in Trading Places. And then Beverly Hills Cop came out. I mean, he was the star of Saturday Night Live in that time.
Yes.
There was
Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood.
Yeah.
I mean,
and to the point where Nick Nolte was supposed to host Saturday Night Live one time with Eddie Murphy being its primary cast member. Nick fell ill, and so Eddie hosted the show, and to this day, Eddie Murphy's the only SNL cast member to ever host the show during his run
as a cast member.
And what was funny about that episode is that he doesn't say live from New York, it's Saturday night. He said live from New York, it's the Eddie Murphy show. On that
Did we get the Eddie laugh too, like the classic Eddie laugh out of that? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
I was wondering if you had an impression. Everybody does
of that in this movie, and it was so much fun. It won the People's Choice Award for Favorite Motion Picture. It was nominated for Golden Globe for Best Picture, musical comedy. It was nominated for an Oscar for Best Original Screenplay, and it won a Grammy for the Best Score soundtrack. And we'll get to the soundtrack in a little bit. We talked about Eddie Murphy as Axel Foley. He was only 23 when this movie came out. That's crazy to me. And I think where I was at 23 years old. But he acted well beyond 23 in the movie.
Absolutely.
I would have thought Axel was closer to probably 30. Would you say so?
I know. I agree completely. Just, when you look at a young detective cop in Detroit kind of going into the storyline of the movie there, like you would imagine most civil servants, right, start at the age of 21. That's kind of the rule, right? And so 23, that means if truly he was 23 in that movie, he made detective in 2 years. Now, you're right. Like, he's definitely late 20s, early 30s probably in this movie. And just kind of the swagger that goes with his character, how he interacts with people. And if you look at some of the backstory, even if you go into some of the sequels and stuff like that, they go into, he has the line, well, I wasn't always a good cop. So
he's had time to be a bad
there's
cop.
some time that he was probably bad growing up on the streets of Detroit. And, it comes in a little bit later with his buddy in the movie, Mikey Tandino, that, that kind of alludes to a little bit of kind of their background together.
Yeah, they're car thieves.
Exactly.
And Mikey kind of takes the fall, and Axel winds up becoming a cop. Mikey approaches him and says he's got another job, basically. Asks him to help steal a car. He's like, I can't do that anymore, man. I'm a cop.
Well, they're drunk in a pool hall.
Yeah.
And, as drunk guys do, reminiscing about their childhood, he's like, I got an idea. Let's go steal a car. And he's like, I can't do that. I'm a police officer now, so.
He's running this sting operation on his own without any kind of oversight from the police department.
Yes.
Thinking that he's going to bust these guys who are selling, looks like cigarettes, smuggling in cigarettes.
He's running a
fence
fence for illegal cigarettes that have a tax stamp on them. So he's like, look, these are the real deal. They got tax stamps on them. You can sell these to kids. And he's wanting $5,000 for a truckload of cigarettes in 1984. So, imagine cost of inflation. That truck's probably worth millions today. And he's running against these two guys. And of course, it's spoiled by a police officer who pulls up and is, hey, do I know you? Don't I know you? You look familiar. But at 23, he's doing that.
Watching the movie, of course, going in that he's a cop. It's the title of the movie, Beverly Hills Cop. You understand he's not actually who he's posing as, which is, a guy who's running this operation, right? So he's a cop. What kind of threw me was I didn't realize he was going out on his own. I figured he was there in an official capacity, running it much the way that Mel Gibson's character in Lethal Weapon is running the sting early in that movie.
Buying coke at a Christmas tree farm.
Right. Which he was doing in somewhat of an official capacity. That one went crazy. But I expected when I saw the cops pull up, I'm thinking, they're going to blow his cover. What are they doing? Or the other thought that went through my mind was, he's distracting them until the police officers come up and they're going to jump in and make the arrest, right?
Yeah.
And then they start shooting at him, and then the chase goes on with maybe the most indestructible 18-wheeler in history. This thing looks like a bulldozer just going through the streets of Detroit, smashing everything that comes in its way.
And I love the cop cars in that movie. Like, that's totally 1980s. There are these boxy Chevrolet Caprices and Plymouths that are running up and down the street with like the single cherry on top. But if you look at the cars in it, they just have a decal on the door that says Detroit Police on them. Like, they don't have like the official badging of what a police car is. And none of them are the same. A little goof in that side of it. None of those cars are the same. They're all different makes, different models. They all look different as they get smashed up and destroyed as this semi-tractor trailer is just barreling down the streets and cars are being spun out. It's probably a ridiculous chase scene.
It's a very ridiculous chase.
But, you know, that's typical 80s buddy cop movie, though, or beginning of a cop movie where you have that character set up where he's the rogue or he's the loose cannon type, and he's going to go out and do things on his own or the way he feels they should be done. And you know, that's just kind of that setup of where it's just this massive amount of mayhem. And it's like, oh, well, that's par for course for this character. That's what we should expect out of him for the next, hour and a half while we're watching this film.
Yeah, he goes back to the police department. Everybody's making fun of him because he's excited. He's happy because he made the bust, right?
Yeah.
The criminal has been arrested. There has been a ton of collateral damage, but he did his job, even though it really wasn't his job to do. He got the guy busted, which is obvious foreshadowing for where we're heading with the movie, as you said. But it was fun to see a very young Paul Reiser in a brief cameo. Not really a cameo, but a brief role, very small role as his partner there at the police station.
Yeah,
and
Paul Buckman, My Two Dads, I think, and Mad About You fame.
Yeah.
And then the next year he goes on, or maybe 2 years later, I think he goes on to play like the most hated man in space and Aliens. So he was in the movie Aliens with Sigourney Weaver. I don't know if you saw that movie. It's an 80s movie. Did you see it?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so you haven't seen it.
That's
yeah,
what
he
I'm
becomes
going to.
probably the most hated man in space because he's like the company man for the company that's sending them out to go do this job in this mining facility. And he becomes very widely regarded. And there's a lot of memes going on about him on the internet now as like the most hated man in space.
That's going to be one of my movies. It's on the list.
Is it on the list?
We'll get to the Alien franchise a little bit later on. Here on Video Oblivious. Paul Reiser, Mad About You is what I remember him from. Yeah. And I remember him more recently, he was on Stranger Things.
Stranger Things, yeah.
And so maybe a little bit of a throwback to his 80s police public official rule. I know they did a lot of that where they would bring back people who were very popular in the 80s to play on Stranger Things in that series. I'm a little bit behind. I haven't seen the fourth season yet, so no spoilers.
Oh, no spoilers.
I'm going to get to it.
Yeah.
I just haven't gotten to the fourth season
Does
yet.
he return? Does he not return?
We'll find out. Audrey's threatening to make me watch it, but I'll get to it. I've got a lot of 80s movies to watch.
By the time you watch it, Stranger Things Season 5 will be
that's
out.
what happened. I watched 2 right before 3 came out, so it was like I got 2 seasons in a row.
Okay.
So maybe I'll do the same thing.
The fact that
here.
you've made it this far, a year, maybe 18 months since it's come out, and you're still not wanting spoilers is pretty good. That's pretty commendable.
I try. Let's get to some of the other cast members. We had Stephen Berkoff as Victor Maitland. He's the big bad.
Bad guy.
Movie. He had been in several other things. He was in Octopussy. That was right around the same time.
Yep.
He was in Rambo First Blood, that was the second or third in the Rambo series.
Well, so there was First Blood, which was like the original title of Rambo, and then there was Rambo First Blood, which I think was the second one, if I'm not like it's weird the way that they were named. But yeah, he's the if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, he's the Russian bad guy in Vietnam in Rambo 2. We'll just call it Rambo 2.
The European flair.
Oh yeah, he's got that European flair. Absolutely.
He was mainly a theater actor, playwright, director.
He has a very long list of working credits. I think I looked at it on IMDb, and he has something like 200 plus credits to his name, and he's still working.
Oh yeah, he's still out there and very respected, especially in that theater world. And he, you put on here the henchman Zach. So I did not realize until this morning that the henchman Zach, played by Jonathan Banks, that his name was Zach.
Yeah,
I was kind of going through the synopsis of the movie again just before we recorded, and I went, I don't remember him being
his
called
name
Zach.
Is really only mentioned, I believe, twice because Stephen Berkoff or Victor Maitland, he calls him darling quite often throughout the movie. He's got that kind of European, swagger. So he goes, darling, would you mind doing this? And whatever. And I'm terrible with accents for that part, but he calls him darling, but he gets called by his name like once or twice.
I totally missed that because I definitely would have latched onto that. Obviously, he was in Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, shows I have not seen.
Oh my goodness,
I'm going to though.
Yeah.
Here's the thing about Breaking Bad is once the hype machine really picked up, I missed it when it was new. Once the hype machine really picked up, I was like, okay, maybe I should watch this show. And then I started watching. I watched the first 3 or 4 episodes, and then just got sidetracked with something else. Then I find out how the series ends, and I'm like, well, I don't care.
You blew it. You blew it, yeah.
But Better Call Saul, I know it's very good, and I haven't seen it yet, but I kind of want to go back and get into that universe. So I'm looking forward to that. When I get through some of these 80s movies, we'll get to that. Judge Reinhold, let's talk about him. I've loved Judge Reinhold.
Yes.
And I did not know he was in this movie going into it. All I knew about Beverly Hills Cop was Eddie Murphy.
Sure.
That's all I mean,
if you look at I remember renting this movie when I was a kid. So American Home Video was a rental store in Plano, Texas. Shout out to them. I'm pretty sure they're long since out of business. But there was a guy in there. His name was Patrick, and he is the one who recommended this movie for me to rent, even though I had never seen it. But, later on in life, I'm looking at. You look at the box covers. You remember going to the video store and you would look at a box cover. And, of course, Eddie Murphy's on the box cover. That's the only thing you can associate this movie with if you had never seen it before is Eddie Murphy sitting on the front of a car with his arms crossed, kind of giving the, high school photo look.
Holding a gun.
Holding a gun. Exactly. Holding a gun. You're like, oh, cool cop movie. Yeah, absolutely. But, and then you wouldn't know any of the other principal cast members if you had never heard of it before.
No, and Judge Reinhold at that time hadn't really made a name for himself. He had done a few things here and there.
Fast Times at Ridgemont High was probably the thing he was most known for prior to that, and then Stripes too with Bill Murray and Bill Murray, John Candy,
Harold Ramis.
Yeah.
And he's one of those guys that if you first saw this movie in 1984, you wouldn't know his name.
No.
But you would see him and go, oh, that guy. And you would rack your brain. You wouldn't have IMDb to go to.
He was probably that guy in the 80s.
Yeah.
He was the guy that you didn't know who he was, and you're like, you're snapping your finger, oh, what's his name? And then, of course, you're like, Judge Reinhold. What kind of name is that?
He's got a very unique name. It's a nickname. Judge is not a given name. It's a unique name. But we were kind of reminiscing about Judge Reinhold and some of the various roles that he's had since Beverly Hills Cop. He'll always be the close talker on Seinfeld to me. That's his iconic role. And whenever I see him, that's the first thing I think of. But have you seen Arrested Development?
Yes.
Where he plays Judge Reinhold.
Judge Reinhold. Judge Reinhold.
Yeah, that was really
well, for
good.
me, I think too, growing up, grew up in the 80s, but then towards the 90s, I remember him as Neil from the Santa Claus movies. Opposite Tim Allen, right? So he's the new stepdad to the son.
Yes.
And he was in 1, 2, and 3, and I'm not sure I remember him in the Santa Claus, so the Disney Plus TV series. I'm not sure if he's in that, but he was in those 3 as well. So that's where I remember from later on. But I remember him probably before that too with Fast Times, but also from Gremlins.
Okay.
If you saw the movie Gremlins,
it's been a while. I have seen.
He was a bank teller. He was the bank manager, I guess, to Zach Galligan. His character, he was kind of his boss, and he was kind of the kid from high school that nobody liked, but became the manager of the bank. And him and Phoebe Cates' character, of course, obviously were just like, ugh, this guy, to him. So that's where I remember him from, too. And Gremlins, I think, was 83?
I think so.
It was a year or two earlier, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, Beverly Hills Cop was really his kind of breakout role.
Sure, yeah.
Gremlins, by the way, I'm looking it up. It was also 1984.
Okay.
It was released the summer of '84, so 6 months.
So prior. 6 months beforehand.
Yeah. But his role in Beverly Hills Cop was really what shot him into stardom. People started to recognize he wasn't just, oh, I know that guy from somewhere anymore. It was like, oh, that's Billy from Beverly Hills Cop. Yeah. That's where he started to really get that notoriety, and that led him to a starring role in a movie called Vice Versa with Fred Savage in 1998, 88, which bombed. It was a massive flop. And basically forced him back into role of that guy.
And I remember that movie. So, did you see it?
I didn't know.
Okay, you didn't
should I do that one for the
podcast? You should, just because I think Fred Savage has such a extensive catalog of 80s movies with, The Princess Bride, The Wizard, this movie. And this movie was like Freaky Friday, kind of an opposite, a body swap type movie where the dad is kind of like this straight character and the son is, more the sarcastic, Dennis the Menace type character, that they were building up in the 80s, or Zach Morris type character that you would think in like the late 80s, early 90s, and they swap roles.
Okay.
And so obviously you can imagine, hilarity ensues with this movie, but critics hated it and people hated it because we had seen that movie or that type of movie probably multiple times and well overdone to that point.
Body swap movies are the worst. I mean, just in general, I think there was one I saw. I don't remember the name of it, but it was Jason Bateman and Ryan Reynolds about 10 years ago.
The Change-Up.
The Change-Up.
Yeah, The Change-Up.
One of the worst movies I've ever seen. I went to we got one of those. So I was working at a radio station at the time, and they gave us one of those passes to the advanced screening.
Yeah.
So we went on like a Tuesday night, 3 days before it was supposed to come out, to this advanced screening. And I just remember being there and just thinking, this is awful.
And I'm a huge Ryan Reynolds, huge Jason Bateman fan. But yeah, I'll even agree it probably wasn't their best.
It was raunchy for the sake of being raunchy.
Yeah. Well, that was those movies too, because that would have come out.
That was like 2011,
2010, right? So that's kind of when that type of movie, that type of comedy was coming out, when the Will Ferrell movies were kind of getting like that, and that kind of slapsticky comedy thing with the raunchiness was probably big in the early 2010s.
It was, but
did you? I'm sure you saw it later than that. You didn't see it.
No, I saw it before it came out.
Okay,
the advanced screening.
Oh, that's right. You said that. Okay.
But it was. I think I'm with you. I'm a huge Jason Bateman fan. Always have been. We talked about that in the Teen Wolf episode. Yeah. But I think him playing against type. His type is straight man, very normal guy, and let everybody else around him be crazy. Sarcastic. And so to do a body swap where he goes into the rowdy character, it just didn't feel right. No. And I think that's part of the reason why I hate body swap movies, because you're right. It's been done so many times.
All right, sidebar. Worst type of movie or genre of movie, body swap or time loop?
Body swap.
By far.
I enjoy a time loop movie occasionally.
And the reason I ask that is because my wife is vehemently against time loop movies, but loves body swap movies.
Really?
Yeah, like Freaky Friday, Vice Versa. I'm sure she probably would adore it, but anything like in that Freaky Friday type of where people swap, she thinks it's hilarious. It's funny.
I do enjoy a good time loop movie. We were just talking about the other day about Source Code with Jake Gyllenhaal's a good one.
Yeah.
And there was one, I think, called Palm Springs that came out on Hulu a couple years ago. Andy Samberg, a time loop movie. That was really good. I enjoyed that. And here we are recording the day after Groundhog Day, the ultimate time loop movie.
Time loop movie ever created.
One of the greatest movies ever.
I'm assuming you've seen that movie. So
dozens.
I watched it last night because it is it's a staple in my household that we have to watch it on Groundhog's Day. And I believe it was on repeat yesterday on AMC all day long. So they're doing like a Christmas story type thing with it. But yeah, it's a fantastic time loop show.
Man, we have gotten way off track. Let's get back to Beverly Hills Cop. Taggart. I loved the role that John Ashton played as John Taggart. He's had a ton of movie and TV roles, and he seems to be typecast as a cop. He plays a cop in a lot. He just looks like a cop.
Very much, yes.
And I remember him from Little Big League. You remember that movie?
Yes.
I forget the role that he played. Was he the coach or something?
Yeah, he was the assistant coach because Billy would have been the general manager and became the manager of the ball club. But yeah, he was definitely the assistant manager. And I think he was there to be like his chaperone and keep an eye on him.
Yeah, that's where I remembered him from. I was like, I know him from somewhere. I did cheat and look it up on IMDb, but I was like, that's where it was. It was Little Big League. All right, you've got a story about the casting of Judge and John.
So this particular one, when they were casting for the role of the Beverly Hills Cops, so to speak, right? The director and the casting director called in a bunch of different guys, and they gave him this scene. They said, here you go. We just want to check your chemistry between these two guys. So John Ashton and Judge get paired together, and the director says, all right, I want you to pretend that you are an old married couple and just see where it goes. So Judge Reinhold goes over, they're sitting in a casting room, and he picks up a magazine, and he picks up this news article, and he goes, did you know that the average 40-year-old male has 5 pounds of undigested red meat in his bowels? And John Ashton just looks over and exactly word for word, why the heck would I need to know that? And that's where that scene came from during the stakeout. That was their audition for it. They said it was so fantastic, so well done. You got the role, and they used it in the movie.
I love that. I didn't know, though. I loved that scene. That was so much fun with them sitting in the car. Foley knows they're out there tailing. He knows it from the beginning because he's in the car with Jenny, and he says, the cops are following us. They're in a beige Ford back there. And so when he gets to his room, he sends room service to them in their car, which is a hilarious scene with Billy accepting it. Oh, I had a shrimp sandwich. It was
shrimp
great.
Salad sandwich, yeah.
It was so much fun. I love
this
that
movie.
Scene.
So it had a very well written and finished script by the screenwriters that wrote it, but 90% of this movie is improv. And
Really?
90% of the takes that come out of this movie were all improv takes. And I know you're a big improv guy.
Yeah.
And you can imagine Eddie Murphy just improving everything.
It doesn't surprise me.
They would read the scene as written, and then the director, Martin Burst, would say, all right, just go. And that's become a big thing in cinema now, right? Where they just let him take the scene where they want to go. But you imagine Eddie Murphy just going off on his own, and these guys are just forced to play along with him. And, scenes like that are born. It was very encouraged to John and Judge to do that in the scenes that they were in as well. And
That's
so
so
this
cool.
movie was so improvised. And you can tell by the way that some of the scenes play out and some of the dialogue from Eddie or from Axel and how it goes. It doesn't seem like anything you had seen in the 80s at that point, or even going through the mid-80s. Everything dialogue-wise, sometimes does a movie stand the test of time? And a lot of time we look at dialogue and we go, no, the dialogue in this is so horrible. I watch episodes, I'm forced to watch episodes at home because my father-in-law lives with us, and he'll watch like Barney Miller, and I'll listen to the dialogue. Like, the dialogue of this is so terrible. And I apologize to any of our listeners that are Barney Miller fans, but gee, the dialogue is horrible. But, when Eddie Murphy did the dialogue for this, even the improv scenes, the dialogue is really good.
Yeah, it sounds natural.
It sounds very natural.
Yeah.
It's not written for screen.
And that's not a surprise at all. I didn't know that, but it does not surprise me at all because Eddie Murphy is a very, very funny human being and always has been. And with a stand-up comedy background and his acting. We were I was in New York a couple weeks ago, went to a couple Broadway shows, and it just, because I'm an improviser, and when I'm on stage doing improv, every scene is fresh, new. You literally make it up as you go. You couldn't redo it again if you tried. It's the complete opposite on Broadway, where you have to do it meticulously the same day after day, sometimes multiple times a day. And if you deviate one word from the script, one note from the music, if you deviate at all, you get written up and reported to Actors Equity. And it would drive me insane
Absolutely.
to be
There's
in
no
that
way.
kind of environment where you have to stick so much to it. Now, when you're forming the show, that's when you interpret things. That's when you can say, but once those Broadway shows or any sort of stage presentation is set, it's set.
That's it.
That's it. You can't change
Ruled
it.
with an iron fist on Broadway.
And with film and and television, it's completely the opposite. You want to honor the screenwriters. You want to honor those who had the creative vision to put it together. It always helps if one of the screenwriters is also a producer or a director of the film, where they can be a little more flexible with their own material. But like this, or like I've heard a lot about The Office, where like, okay, we'll do it once as scripted, and then at that point, let's do another take and just kind of see where it goes. And a lot of times, that's where the funniest stuff comes from.
Absolutely.
Especially when the actors know their characters and they know their character beats. And if you're playing a role like Eddie Murphy is here, where he knows the framework of his character and he can get into that mindset. And this is what I have to do in improv, except you form the character right then and there. Yeah. But once you know that character, you embody that character, and it's like you make the decisions as they would. You say what they would say. Yeah. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that Eddie Murphy was able to improvise so much as this Axel Foley character.
And could you imagine, though, like this role, Axel Foley, wasn't originally written for him.
It wasn't.
It was actually a Stallone project. So could you imagine Stallone being in this role?
I missed that. No,
Stallone,
not a chance.
Stallone decided that he didn't want to do it.
It would not have been a comedy.
No. I'm sure it was a completely different type of movie at that point. And so Eddie was slated to do Ghostbusters, and he gave up the role of Winston in Ghostbusters.
I don't think I knew that
to do
either.
this movie.
Yeah, because they were the same
And then enter
year.
Ernie Hudson to do Winston Zeddemore, and Axel Foley now becomes, Eddie Murphy, or Eddie Murphy becomes Axel Foley. So yeah, that's kind of strange, like how that whole thing moves.
And we talk about 1984 and Ghostbusters dominating that summer. Beverly Hills Cop swooping in right at the end of the year and upending it as the number one movie.
Yeah, and I think Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, I think, was earlier in that year, and I think it was the number one movie, and then Unseated, or maybe vice versa, Unseated. Not the movie vice versa, but Unseated.
Well, let's just go through. And actually, Beverly Hills Cop is, as time has changed, now Ghostbusters has passed it as the number one movie of 1984. Beverly Hills Cop. Then Indiana Jones, Temple of Doom. Gremlins, Karate Kid, Police Academy, Footloose, Romancing the Stone, Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, and Splash. Those were the top 10 movies of
Tom
1984.
Hanks, Romancing the Stone, Michael Douglas, and
Kathleen Turner?
Kathleen Turner. Yeah, Kathleen Turner. Yep. Yeah, that was a good one. I like that movie. That was a good movie.
I don't think I've seen it, but I do remember
it had a good one, and then it had a really bad.
Bob Zemeckis made that movie,
and then it had a bad sequel.
Yeah. Yeah, that was Bob Zemeckis' movie right before Back to the Future.
Danny DeVito was in it, I think, too. He played like the little kind of like henchman chasing after them or something.
I may have seen it a long time ago, but I don't remember. I think it qualifies.
It was a wild movie.
I think it qualifies for the list.
Yeah.
We're not even through the cast yet. Ronny Cox as Lieutenant, is it Bogomil?
Bogomil.
Yeah,
Lieutenant Bogomil.
So he is the head of the, or not the head, but the leader of this police force there in Beverly Hills, and he does not like him some Axel Foley coming in, and he runs the department very prim and proper. Everything is by the book. Like a Broadway play. You cannot deviate at all. And then Foley comes in with his improvised police style and throws the whole thing for a loop. And Bogomil is not a fan.
No, he's not.
And neither are really Taggart or Billy, for that matter. But I think the strip club scene kind of changes things, right? That's the turning point.
Yeah, that's the turning point. So really, and I want to back up just for a second.
Do it.
So you can see the differences in between, and I love the way this is set up. At the beginning of the movie, you have what is a typical 1980s movie. You have music video montage of the introduction of a scene. So you have the introduction of Detroit.
With the heat is on.
With the heat is on, right?
Yeah.
And you've got all the blight of Detroit. You've got these people that are on the street. You know, one guy I think is smoking pot. Kids are like playing in the streets, and there's drug deals going on, and that's what Detroit is. And then you get this opposite effect when Eddie rolls into Beverly Hills, and now you have another montage, and you've got sunshine and multi-million-dollar homes and cars and all this stuff going on. And our first introduction to the Detroit police is kind of Axel Foley and the way he does things, but a very, very strict Inspector Todd, which we'll get to his character here in a minute. And then you've got our first introduction in Beverly Hills, the two police officers, when Eddie gets thrown out of Victor Maitland's building in the glass in the street, and you have these two robot-like Beverly Hills cops who come up to him and tell him to freeze. They arrest him without any questioning, and he's in the back of the police car looking around like this is the nicest police car, and we roll up to now Bogomil, who is just as straight-laced, and these guys are exactly, they work for him, and they operate exactly the way he tells them to operate. Very controlled environment.
I did find it funny when I was watching the credits of the film, the two police officers who arrest Axel after he's thrown through the window, and he gets arrested for being thrown through a window. Those characters do not have names.
Nope.
They are listed as Beverly Hills Cop 1 and Beverly Hills Cop 2.
That's right.
And I'm thinking, if you're that actor and you go back through your credits, you go, I was the Beverly Hills Cop in Beverly Hills Cop.
And
the other one goes, I was Beverly Hills Cop 2 in Beverly Hills Cop. It's just funny to me. I was like, they just give them that name.
That's your name. Yep. As who you're typecasted as now from now on. You went on to do, what was your like credits after that? You maybe did like an episode of Chips and, you know, maybe something else that was like maybe an episode of the A-Team where you played a cop in California.
In the background as an extra on Cheers.
Exactly.
But no, I imagine, and I don't know this, I'm just joking, but I imagine that actor on his headshot, his 8x10, it says Beverly Hills Cop played Beverly Hills Cop. And so he got his due. And who knows? I could do IMDb, and I'm not going to at this point to figure out who that gentleman was. We had Jenny Summers, who plays a very pivotal role in the movie. She is Axel and Mikey's friend. From high school?
So she grew up with them in Detroit.
Yeah. And
I guess then she moved out to California and went to go work for Victor Maitland, who was our bad guy played by Stephen Berkoff. But you put it on here in your notes too, and I said the same thing. Like, you never saw her after this really again in anything. Like, I went through her IMDb credits, and the only thing I remember her from is this, and she was in An Officer and a Gentleman with Richard Gere.
She was very good in this.
Yeah. No, I thought she was good.
She just didn't really do anything else.
Didn't do anything else after this, so I thought she was a good role.
Retired from acting in the mid-'90s, so hasn't done anything.
I think she has a credit on like the Twilight Zone too, and that's really about it.
Yeah, but I thought she was. Yeah. She played the role very well. Yeah. She was natural in it. She was believable. I have nothing bad to say about the character.
Although, with a guy like Victor Maitland, when you meet him, maybe he's different prior, like when she's doing her job interview. How do you not know this guy is a bad guy?
Yeah, because
when you go in, you like have an interview with this guy to run his art studio. How do you go, yeah, this guy's a bad guy?
You're right, because she has no inkling at all that he's doing anything sinister. And when Axel approaches her and says, I think he's responsible for Mikey's death, and I think he's dealing drugs, and she's like, no, he's just an art dealer.
Yeah,
he's been doing this 10 years.
That's all he does. Yeah, that's all he does. That's what he does. Yeah.
He appreciates fine art. He doesn't at all look like a bad guy from an 80s movie at all. We had some very small speaking roles from a couple of recognizable faces who would go on later in the 80s to become fairly big stars. Yep. We had Bronson Pinchot, who I forget what's the name of the character.
Perfect Strangers.
Well, no, I mean
Balky Bartakamus.
Right, the character in this movie.
Oh, Serge. Sorry,
that's right.
I'm getting way ahead. Yeah, Serge. Serge.
With his accent, it reminded me of Balky. Maybe it was an early iteration of the character.
Yeah, it was. I think Perfect Strangers was 87, so that would have been a couple years later. But that's something like Bronson's characters, like he's known for accents. Like that's kind of his bread and butter wheelhouse. He has that kind of European look to him. So I think that like he's mostly typecasted now as that guy who has an accent. And his character in this movie, as the employee in the art, in the art gallery, was supposed to be quite a bit smaller role. Like it was supposed to be shared between him and Donnie, the guy that comes up that's got, his shirt open and he's like, Donnie, this isn't sexy. What is this, to scrub the dog or whatever it is that he says? It's hilarious, but it was supposed to be a shared role between them. And I think he kind of stole the scene.
He did.
And that was just, okay, we're going to keep him in here.
He had been in Risky Business the year before.
Yeah.
And then I didn't even know this until the other day, so I'm a member of the various retro TV groups on Facebook, and somebody posted a cast photo of a show that Bronson Pinchot starred on. It was canceled halfway through the season. It was called Sarah. In 1985, it only made it 13 episodes, but his co-stars included Gina Davis, who played the star, Sarah.
Okay.
And Bill Maher played a character named Marty Lang. And when I saw the photo, I thought it was Ryan Stiles at first.
Oh.
And because a very young Bill Maher kind of looked like
Ryan Stiles from Whose Line, yeah.
No, it was very, very interesting. I didn't know Bill Maher ever did any acting. I just thought he was a political commentator.
Yeah, he's always been a political pundit on TV as long as I've known him.
But for Bronson Pinchot's sake, it worked out well that show got canceled, which led him to Perfect Strangers, which was a hit for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, him and Cousin Larry Appleton. Yeah.
Cousin Larry?
Cousin Larry.
I loved Perfect Strangers.
I did too.
I didn't maybe understand it because it was on when I was a kid, but I do remember.
No, in fact, this funny story, my brother and I, because it was Balki Bartakamus from Mypos, right? Mm-hmm. And my brother and I think when this was out, we're probably like 6 and 7 years old when this show came out, and we're probably watching it on the TGIF lineup on ABC. We literally, for some reason, thought Balki was an alien. And I don't know where that came from. As a kid, you kind of draw like these parallels to things when you're a kid, but for some reason,
same thing.
Yeah, like we thought Balki was an alien. And of course, now I watch it later on. I think we watched it when it came out on Hulu, my wife and I did. And our youngest, Kennedy, loved it. Loved Perfect Strangers. I mean, we watched the first 3 or 4 seasons, and she loved that show. She thought it was hilarious.
Damon Wayans also makes a very small, and I guess he helps Axel do the thing that really is the turning point of the movie.
Yeah.
He gives him 3 bananas. His character is called Banana Man.
Banana Man.
And when I saw him, I was like, "Oh, that's Damon Wayans!" Like I knew immediately
it was his very first appearance in film, if I'm not mistaken. Too like really? That is his very first appearance.
It is his first. You're right. It is his first credited appearance on screen, film or television.
And like. So the director, like, how do you direct that scene to, like, get him to do that character, right? Because obviously he's playing a much more effeminate character than probably who he is in real life. And he's, just run with it. Just improv and run with it. So he plays, like, this effeminate Banana Man character that's working the Continental Buffet, which 1984, a $12.95 buffet that gets you just bananas, apples, oranges, and strawberries. That is ridiculous. Yeah. That is expensive, even by 1984 standards. Yeah. Like, that's a $30 breakfast buffet that's just giving you fruit.
Wow. It was so Axel takes the bananas and shoves them in the tailpipe of Taggart and Billy's car, and we're off to the races as far as the story goes from there. Yeah. Such a funny scene when he sticks the bananas, and by the time they drive away, I had forgotten that he had shoved the banana in the tailpipe, and then the car just breaks down in the middle of the U-turn there, and I was like, "Oh yeah, the banana in the tailpipe!" Such a funny scene.
Was that a MythBusters thing? Didn't they do that? I think they did that years ago, and I don't remember the outcome. I'd have to go back and rewatch MythBusters to see if that truly was myth busted or if it was myth confirmed.
I think you're right. We don't have time to stop and go back, so we're not going to here. But you're right. I'm going to have to go back and watch it. I love MythBusters. I've loved it ever since it came on. The final character we're talking about, Inspector Todd. Now, he is the boss at the very beginning of the movie. We don't see him again after the first 4 or 5 minutes of the film because he's the boss in Detroit. And you said was not an actor?
No, he was never an actor, never had an acting credit to his name prior than that. When the director Martin, is it Burst or Brest? Brest. When Martin Brest came to Detroit when he was doing scouting, Inspector Todd, played by Gilbert Hill, was a Detroit detective. And so he kind of showed him around the city, and they formed a relationship, and he wrote the role for him to be the the detective, or the inspector in charge of the detectives for the Detroit Police Department.
Never
and those are
would've
his
known.
and those are his only 3 credited roles are Beverly Hills Cop, Beverly Hills Cop 2, and Beverly Hills Cop 3. That's it. And then later on, I think he ran for like councilman and then mayor of the city of Detroit. And I think he lost when in his bid for mayor, but he was a councilman for a long time.
That's crazy because I never would have thought. I mean, he looks like a cop.
Yeah.
He definitely looks like a police officer, but I never would have known that.
And Eddie Murphy even said, I think in the commentary for Beverly Hills Cop, that he attributed some of his stylings to Gilbert Hill when he met him prior to production. The way he carries his gun in his back pocket, or not his back pocket, but behind his belt, behind his back. That was very much a Gilbert Hill thing that he did in real life. Huh. And Eddie, when you see him tucking his gun behind his back, he got that from him. It wasn't anything that he drew from previous movies. And, I think if we go back, I don't know if that really even was a thing.
I don't know.
Where did that start? That could have been from this guy. This guy could be the guy that originally did that. Who knows?
Interesting. That reminds me of a story from The Office, where there was a character in the Dundies episode of The Office when they get thrown out of the Chili's. The Chili's manager was an actual Chili's manager. It's the only acting he's ever done. And in that case, it was because Chili's said, if you're going to use our brand, we have to have a representative of our brand saying that we don't overserve people alcohol. So they literally hired this manager of a Chili's to play the manager of a Chili's.
We need you for authenticity,
That's
too.
exactly what it
we
was.
We need some no-nonsense Chili's manager, and you are that person.
It's got to be something that isn't done a ton in Hollywood. But it really worked here. I never would have done that.
Yeah, no, I mean, the only other time I can think of it, specifically that comes to mind would be Full Metal Jacket, Stanley Kubrick's R. Lee Ermey, right? He was a drill instructor, if I'm not mistaken, in the Marine Corps, and I think he was serving as an advisor to that movie, and the guy that they had hired to do it kept flubbing lines and couldn't do it, and R. Lee Ermey's trying to teach this guy to do it, and Kubrick's kind of like, why don't you just do it? And so that's how his role was born.
And here's an interesting note as we wrap up going through the principal cast. And this is not necessarily true of a lot of 80s movies that are 40-plus years old now. But everybody's still alive.
Yeah.
And for the most part, a lot of them are returning for a sequel that is being made. It's finished. Yeah. And it's just waiting to be released on Netflix. I guess the fourth in the franchise is coming out in July, called Beverly Hills Cop Axel F. And it is also produced by Jerry Bruckheimer. Eddie Murphy is producer. So Eddie's in it. Judge Reinhold is in it. John Ashton is in it. Paul Reiser. Bronson Pinchot is making a return.
He does make a guest appearance.
It's fascinating to me that so many, if basically everybody in the cast is still living. And we're going to add Kevin Bacon to that cast. Yeah. Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Yeah.
Taylor Page. I'm not familiar with Taylor.
I believe she's supposed to play Axel's daughter or something to that effect, if I remember reading.
She was born in 1990, so she is younger than the Beverly Hills Cop franchise.
Yeah.
So I will have to see 2 and 3, and we might have to come back and do another podcast.
2, I would recommend. Okay. Yes, definitely. 3, I thought 3 was okay. Even more than okay, because when it comes to sequels, for me, I don't care so much about the original. I'm one of those few people that the sequels don't always have to be as good as the original type person. So I was okay with 3 kind of not being great, as good or better than the second or the third one, or the second or the first one. But it was fun. It was a fun movie. And if you go back and watch it, it's a fun movie.
Do you remember the first time you saw Beverly Hills Cop?
The first time I saw
Obviously, it wasn't in the theater.
No, I wouldn't have been in the theater.
You were 1 year old.
If so, my parents and I have some conversations we need to have. It would have been probably the late 80s, maybe even the early 90s.
And you said it was because the video store clerk recommended it.
The video store clerk recommended it. We would go into town, and so I grew up like in Plano, Texas, but we moved later on in life to a very small town that had a population of like 945 people. There was no video store in town, so we used to have to go into town further away to pick up these movies. And we would go on Friday nights like everybody else did, and we were allowed to pick movies if our, grades were good or whatever. And I remember picking this movie and my dad being like, "Well, okay, I'm sure that's okay."
That's what I was going to ask, because you're younger than I am by a couple of years. And did they have any hesitancy toward you renting an R-rated, violent,
I don't know,
F-word filled movie?
It's such a long time ago. Probably so, but I was a kid of the 80s like all of us were. Like I was a latchkey kid too. Like both my parents worked.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's things I saw. I had an older sister and an older brother. I'm sure there's things that I saw in the 80s. Like, look, we drank out of water hoses and we were supposed to be home before the street lights came on. Like,
it's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your kids are?
Exactly. We were a little tougher, I think, comparatively speaking. So I think we were okay with it.
Well, I was fairly sheltered and wasn't really allowed to watch a lot of R-rated movies. And I think that's partly what led to the fact that I haven't seen a lot of this stuff, even to this day.
Yeah.
My dad was a little more loose than my mom on that kind of thing, and he would show me things I shouldn't watch occasionally. But I don't think I would have been able to get away with renting Beverly Hills Cop as a choice of my own and then watching it back in my bedroom.
And that probably would have been like the first time I remember getting it on my own. But being a cop family, it is typical of cops to have barbecues and stuff like that. And I remember going to my dad's partner's house, and they would always have movies like this on. Like, his kids, they got to watch anything they wanted to, and the cool thing, like, that I thought was cool, now thinking back with my kids would not be a cool thing, they could cuss and they could watch R-rated movies, and they had all the video games and all this stuff. And I'm pretty sure I probably had seen it there, which probably drew me to wanting to rent it. And then the guy at the rental store saying, "Yeah, you should get this. Is a good one."
Good deal. Do you remember, were you excited when the sequel came out, or was the sequel already out by the time? It
would have been already out. Yeah. 2 would have already been out. 3 probably not would have been out. I remember when 3 came out, and I was excited for Beverly Hills Cop 3 when it came out. I think 3 came out in 94. Yeah. And I was thinking 93 or 94 it would have come out.
It was a good 7 years after the second one.
Yeah, I would have been like 10 or 11 years old at that point. And I remember when it came out, and yeah, I was excited for that one.
Good deal. So if I were to just mention Beverly Hills Cop, not take away the fact that you just recently rewatched it, what's the first image that comes to mind? The first thing that comes to mind if I say Beverly Hills Cop, say something.
I'm not falling for that banana in the tailpipe.
Really?
That scene, probably. The banana in the tailpipe scene, the continental breakfast scene where he's trying to get him to do that, and Surge. Those 3 things, I think, just stand the comedy test of time when it comes to that movie and those specific scenes. Obviously, like the wild, scene that we talked about at the beginning with the chase. When I watched it again the other day, I was like, oh, yeah, okay. That I remember that, and that does stick out. But definitely the banana in the tailpipe scene probably stuck out for me the most. Yeah, absolutely.
Most memorable thing. I didn't even realize that the Axel F song was basically the score of the movie. I've heard that song all my life. I have never associated it with Beverly Hills Cop because I had never seen the movie until this week. And so I'm watching it, and of course the movie starts with The Heat Is On from Glenn Frey. So I know that song, massive hit. And then maybe 5-6 minutes into the film, that Axel F instrumental starts playing. And I was like, man, there's some really good music in this movie. And I, having no knowledge of what that song was, what it was tied to, I was like, what's that song called? And so I Shazammed it on my phone, and it's called Axel F. And I went, oh, son of a bitch. This is the theme for this movie.
Yeah.
And by the end of the movie, I'll be honest, I was a little sick of it. It plays a lot.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of, once again, kind of goes to the genre.
Yeah.
In the 80s, like, we wrote scores and we wrote jingles. Like, jingles were huge in the 80s. Like, everything had a jingle. And so that was written for the movie and just, put in. But it was written and it got so popular in the 80s. I mean, it had radio play.
Oh, yeah.
Like on how often it got played.
And actually, I'm gonna play a little clip of it right here just so people know what we're talking about.
Yeah. And so it got played so much that Casio, the keyboard company, for Christmas, they developed a keyboard for kids that you could play the Axel F theme song on it. Like, it would teach you to play it with lights. And we had it as a kid. It was hilarious, and it was fun to play with.
Was it in the sequels as well, or was it?
Yep.
It was.
It's in the sequels. It's in 2 and 3.
It's Axel's theme.
Yeah, it's Axel's theme.
Right.
It is the equivalent of the Raiders March in Raiders of the Lost Ark with Indiana Jones. It's the equivalent of
the Imperial March.
The Imperial March in Star Wars. Like, when you hear that theme song, if you've seen the movie, you immediately associate it to Eddie Murphy and Axel Foley.
And that's why I didn't, because I had never seen the movie, but I knew the song immediately because...
Shame.
Well, hey, that's over now, and that's the whole point of the show, is for me to get caught up on all these great movies that I've missed. But yeah, that was now I will immediately associate it with Beverly Hills Cop, and then Audrey just completely ruined it for me because she immediately thought of the time it was made fun of on Family Guy, and she pulled that up on YouTube and showed it to me, and I was just like, I hate you so much, because now it's just stuck in my head with the Family Guy joke that was attached to it. So you've got a fish out of water story where you've got this. I mean, we said it earlier, an improvised approach to policing versus a very by-the-book approach to policing. And it really does show the difference between Detroit and how things are done there and how things are done in Beverly Hills. But there's the class structure thing. And the race thing did not come into play.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that it didn't. Right. It didn't need to.
Yeah.
It would have just, I mean, I don't want to gloss that over and say it doesn't matter. But for this story, it really didn't matter. It was more of a class difference between what is Detroit like versus what is Beverly Hills like, and how those police departments operate and which one proves to be more effective. Am I right?
Right. Yeah, you're right. Like, it's not a theme of this movie. It's only, I think race is probably only mentioned one time in this movie, and that's when Axel goes to the Beverly Hotel and he goes to get a room and he says, I'm a small-time reporter for the Rolling Stones. My name's Axel Foley. I'm here to do an interview with Michael Jackson. And we don't have a room available for you. And then he, plays the card. And, don't you think if I was a blah, blah, blah actor or a blah, blah, blah writer, that you would have a room for me and I would be writing this, Michael Jackson is on top of the world. I'm going to call it, Axel Foley can't be in this hotel because he's blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
That's the only time it's played. But
it is. And that is.
It's very well placed, and it's very well kind of written enough to where it's just kind of to further the scene and to get him into the hotel and just to show how sly. It's still kind of character building at that time of like, this is who this guy is.
Yeah, the note I made was he's slick.
Yeah.
Like, he's very good at slipping into character to get around a situation, to get in somewhere, like where he poses as the florist at the to get into Maitland's office, and when he goes to the country club and he talks about having the venereal disease or whatever to get past the maitre d'. It's so classic Eddie Murphy character play, and it's funny every time. That part doesn't get old. I can watch Eddie Murphy do that all day.
In that Rolling Stone article that he said he would write Michael Jackson sitting on top of the world, if I'm not mistaken, there is a Rolling Stone article called Eddie Murphy is sitting on top of the world. I think it was probably written either before or after this. It might have been when he did Delirious. Was it Delirious was his comedy special, I think, in 83 and 87 was Raw or something like that. There was a Rolling Stone article written like Eddie Murphy sitting on top of the world.
And he did, man. He owned those mid-'80s. It was just blockbuster after blockbuster. And it just goes to show what an engaging personality he has when he's on screen. He's so electric. And then, he stepped away for a while when he had kids and he started doing family movies like Dr. Dolittle and Haunted Mansion. He became
Professor.
Became a Disney type star. Yeah. And now that his kids are grown up, he's kind of making a career comeback. And for the most part, he's kind of evaded controversy. He's just been a solid actor. He did not, now when they did the Saturday Night Live 40th anniversary, he did not want to make fun of Bill Cosby.
Yeah.
There was a, I think it was the Celebrity Jeopardy sketch. They tried to get him to play Bill Cosby, and he wouldn't do it.
He wouldn't do it, yeah.
Because he said he didn't want to disrespect.
Stand-up guy.
Yeah.
I mean, like, if I'm correct, like, he never had any issues with drugs.
Yeah.
Like, and he never was an alcoholic. He was just took time away to be a family man.
Yeah. I have a great respect for Eddie Murphy.
Absolutely.
I think he's obviously
like, I think it's
fun.
so much so, if I remember one of the facts too, like, you know, so much of this movie was improvised. There were times where some of the filming and principal filming of this movie went on late into the night. He went so much so that he didn't drink coffee at all. And there was a scene in there that he did drink coffee because it was very late in the evening. And that's where the Super Cop story is born. And that's like the only time he drank coffee on set of shooting this movie that people saw him. The Super Cop scene, the completely improvised. So this is
that was totally improvised.
That was totally improvised.
That was such a great
scene. Was
scene.
completely improvised. Yeah, absolutely. That is the scene where this is after
the strip club.
After the strip club scene, which that song, What Nasty Girl, played by, was it Vanity, I think was who wrote that song. If I'm not mistaken, it was picked by one of the strippers who was in that scene, said, you should play this song while I'm dancing. Like, this is my song.
And it wound up
on the soundtrack. Yeah. Like, they got approval to use it.
It did not wind up on the commercial soundtrack.
No, it was in the score
film.
of the movie.
Right.
So, or the film itself. So the scene is they're in the strip club after that. And so this is where we're learning what kind of cop Axel is too, right? We're still learning, like, he's got an eye and he knows the surroundings, and he sees these two guys walk in that are going to rob the place. And so he tells Taggart, hey, watch this guy coming and going over their cover. These guys are about to, rob the joint. And of course, Billy, the young, kind of wide-eyed, new detective, just has no idea what's going on. And of course, they avert this robbery. And of course, now they're brought in, and Bogomil's questioning Axel and questioning Taggart on how things went on, and he gives them this long story about how Taggart saw them come in, and I had no idea what was going on, and Billy knew everything was going on. I was just standing there, wasn't a part of it. These guys are super cops.
I'm on vacation.
I'm on vacation, and he's lying through his teeth, obviously, to Bogomil. These guys are super cops. That whole story, 100% improvised. On a closed set. If I remember, like, reading it correctly, and in the commentary it said, like, it was a hot set. It was closed. There was no air flowing. Eddie was drinking coffee to try and get it, and he just one take got it done. And there's your Super Cop story, which was a very good scene.
And it foreshadows what happens at the end of the movie when Bogomil does the same thing with his boss.
Yep.
So was that? Do you know the story behind that? Because I don't. Was that inspired by Eddie's
I don't
improvisation?
remember. It had to have been.
Yeah, because he does the same thing.
He does exactly the same thing at the end. So yeah, Bogomil then takes a page out of Axel's book on the improvisation, or Eddie's book, and I guess they probably had to rewrite it and do the entire scene, because boy, that police chief or captain, he was a hard guy.
Yeah. I don't even know the actor who played that, but it was
Luntz, I think, or Chief Lunt. No, maybe that was the guy from 2. I start to get confused sometimes on 2 and 3. Chief Luntz or something like that was the guy's.
But either
name.
way, it was
yeah,
a good way to end the movie on kind of a callback to this iconic scene about halfway through.
Yeah.
And that's the point when Taggart and Billy really start to appreciate Axel for who he is, and they begin to see.
Yeah, because he's looking out for him.
Just as they're removed from the case at that exact moment.
And at the very beginning, we're kind of jumping around, but even Axel does it at the very beginning of the movie when he's brought in for questioning after being thrown out of the plate glass window, and Taggart strikes him in the stomach, and Bogomil, that's when we're introduced to Bogomil, did you strike this man? And he's like, yeah, I did. And do you want to press charges? And he's like, for where I'm from, we don't press charges on cops. And that's kind of where that respect for Taggart has for Foley, where it starts to develop, is like, okay, this guy, he really is like kind of the real deal.
Yeah.
He is one of us.
Well, I am definitely interested in seeing the sequels for real. Yeah. I'm going to get to them both before the new one comes out in July. so that I can watch the new one with fresh eyes.
Got time.
Yeah, I've got plenty of time. And like I said, you and I, we ought to do another podcast for part 2.
Absolutely.
Or maybe we'll combine 2 and 3 or something. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Well, yeah, 3 was the 90s. So what's video oblivious for the 90s called?
Yeah. It doesn't exist yet.
It doesn't exist.
We got a lot of
Working
80s
title.
movies to get through first. but yeah, let's come back and we'll do part 2 somewhere down the line. I'm already planning to do Lethal Weapon 2 with Sebastian not too long from now.
That's a good one.
So
That's
we'll
a good
come
one.
back and do that. And in his mind, and we'll flash back to that episode. He said Lethal Weapon 2 was as good, maybe even better than the original. Just on the surface, and you mentioned this a little bit before, but would you say Beverly Hills Cop 2 is as good or better, or is it a little bit downgraded?
As good.
As good.
As good. We get a little bit better, not better cast, but we get a different bad guy, and then we get multiple bad guys, really, because we get Brigitte Nielsen as a bad guy. So she's kind of like the henchman to the bad guy in that movie. It's as good or better. 3, we get character changes where Taggart's now retired and we have Hector Elizondo now step in to be the detective, the Beverly Hills Cop detective, and Billy moves on to a more administrative role within Beverly Hills Cop, which is kind of funny. And then we have the reappearance of Surge, which is a hilarious scene for Beverly Hills Cop 3. I can't wait for you to see it.
All right, so I'm gonna watch all of those, and then we'll get caught up in the summertime with the new one. And there might even be a bonus episode with the new one. We could get on and discuss that. So let's plan on that for the summer. Let's plan on it. Okay, so I start to wrap up the podcast every episode by asking this question of both of us. If this movie had not been released, let's throw the sequels out, the movie had not been released, it sat there in a can for 40 years, and somebody just found it, what would we think of it?
Yeah, so this movie, I mean, if you really look at like the 1980s, right, 48 Hours came out. That was kind of the kickoff to the buddy cop movie genre. And then this movie came out. And so the buddy cop genre was packaged a lot in the 80s and even in the 90s. And then we saw it in the 2000s with like The Other Guys and things like that. So absolutely, you could take this movie today and repackage it, different characters or whatever, maybe even the same storyline. And it absolutely, I think you could do this movie today and everybody would go, yeah.
It has aged incredibly well.
Oh, yeah.
I think it really has. Maybe as good as any other movie of the ones I've talked about, except maybe The Terminator. It has aged incredibly well. And I think part of it is because the differences between Detroit and Beverly Hills are exactly the same today as they were 40 years ago, if not more staggering.
Absolutely.
But that contrast is such a big part of the film, and the cultures in both cities, and that Axel comes from one and goes to the other. It plays well today, just like it did 40 years ago. There's nothing in this movie that was cringy to me. There was nothing in this movie that was out of place. It felt like if you just threw in a smartphone, you could make it today, word for word, and it would still be a good movie.
Did we see anybody with a cell phone in this movie? I'm sure we did in the Beverly. Yeah, there was somebody like talking on a phone in one of the cars with the hood.
Well, they did have. Apparently, they had GPS and they were able to follow the cops, right?
So no, that wasn't a thing in the 80s. That was actually written specifically for this movie to further the plot. Yes, it was actually, I think, in a DVD commentary one time that said that didn't exist.
No, it didn't.
Was written for the movie to further the plot. And then it later became a thing in real life, obviously.
And they were ahead of their time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
With Beverly Hills Cop. No, I loved this movie. I will say toward the end, maybe the last 20 minutes, it got a little slow. I mean, just as things were, I won't say slow. That was a wrong choice of words. It got a little convoluted. There was a lot of stuff going on when they get to Maitland's mansion. There's a lot of characters that make their play there. And it felt a little bit convoluted. Like, to me, who knows that they're there and who doesn't? Well, Billy's the one who took them there. Does Taggart know they're there? No, but then he figures it out. And because of the GPS
system that doesn't really exist but existed in this movie.
Right, that's how they find where they are. Billy's scene, though, made me laugh out loud in the middle of the shootout when he pops up with the badge. Beverly Hills Police, you're all under arrest. Then he gets shot at. He falls to the ground, and Taggart says, if you ever do that again, I'll kill you.
Yeah.
So great.
So I can't wait for you to see Beverly Hills Cop 2 and 3.
Okay.
Because you will see a big character development for the Billy character, and I don't want to give away spoilers, but he says something in this movie where he says, I hate guns. And so it's funny because you'll see the progression in a complete, I don't want to give it away, but there's something coming with it that I think you're going to find, and you go, okay, all right.
I was, and I don't know, I mean, I know our phones are listening to us and Google searches are listening to us, but when I went to log on to Netflix on my television the other night, and I hit the Netflix button to watch this movie, Beverly Hills Cop is what showed up as the primary thing. It was the first thing I saw on Netflix, and they're showing the trailer for the movie, and then there's a little thing that says, like 96% of the people who see this have thumbs up. It's one of the most popular catalog movies on Netflix, and I was just like, whoa. Like, yeah. I don't know if it pulled that up because I had been talking about doing the podcast and it was listening to us or what, but if it wasn't, how fortuitous was that? But it was just really cool. This movie has, I'm just saying, it's a testament to how much this movie has held up, that it's being recommended by Netflix. Yeah.
40 years later.
Well, they also have skin in the game because they're releasing.
Well, yeah, because they're promoting and producing the new one,
which is, as we record this in early February, is 5 months out. Yeah. It's going to come out in July. Yeah. I think 4th of July weekend is when that's planned. So, do you have any favorite quotes from the film? I know you mentioned the scenes you liked with the banana and tailpipe and all that stuff, but is there one like quote that stands out? You said meme-worthy.
Yeah.
Earlier you were talking about Paul Reiser and Aliens, but
that is a huge thing. Like, I don't know if you're in the TikTok generation, like they constantly give Burke's character, which is Paul Reiser, grief as being like the worst character in space. As far as this movie goes, though, like the quotables, not falling for the banana and the tailpipe thing is pretty quotable, I think, for people who've seen the movie. But
I like the one where he convinces them to go to the strip club. Oh, I'm going to take you guys out. We're just going to go celebrate, have a drink. It's a very nice, conservative place.
It's a very classy, conservative place, yeah. No, so like the Surge scenes, and I keep coming back to it because I just think his character is so funny when he says, this is one that I will say, even to my wife, it's where he's asking him, would you like something to drink? Can I get you something? Can I get you a white wine? Can I get you an espresso? I make it right back there with a little lemon twist. It's good. You should try it. Like, I do that to my wife because we have an espresso machine in our house and she thinks it's hilarious. And I think the quotable side of it too, though, like, when he's asking him in that scene, how much does this piece of art go for? Well, I just sold it yesterday for $150,000. And he's like, get the fuck out of town. And he's like, no, I cannot, so like, because like, it's serious. It's a serious piece. I sold it. And I think that's hilarious. But yeah, I think those are kind of like the quotable pieces for it that really stand out.
Yeah, it was cool. I just have one, we're about wrapping up, but the art museum or the art gallery where they're at is so reminiscent. When I was in New York, I went to the Museum of Modern Art. Have you ever been there?
Yeah.
It reminded me a lot of some of the stuff I saw at MoMA. It was a lot of fun, but it was just like, I get that now. I understand the upper crust of the art world, which I'm not in that. My wife really enjoys that. That's why we went. But I enjoyed my time at the Museum of Modern Art, but I didn't understand a lot of that stuff. So when you walk in and you see this animated piece of art when he walks into Maitland's gallery with heads spinning on platters and a giant table. It's like, that looks like something I would have seen at MoMA.
Exactly. Like, who's going to spend $150,000 and who has a room big enough for this thing to go in their house? Well, obviously somebody who lives in Beverly Hills has
Victor
room
Maitland
for something with Maitland does. Yeah.
Yeah. I drove through Beverly Hills in I guess it might have been, it's 15 years ago at this point. It was just one of those, we were on LA and on vacation, and so let's just go to Beverly, let's drive down Rodeo Drive just to see it. And it's not that impressive.
No.
It looks exactly like it does in every movie you've ever seen it in. Of course, we were equating it to Pretty Woman and not to Beverly Hills Cop, because neither of us had seen that movie. But looking at it in the film as how it looks now, about the same. I would say some of those high-end retailers have closed at this point. It's probably not as glitzy as it was, but there's nothing really that special about it. Matter of fact, I know, because we're just getting this podcast started, most of the listeners are here in Nashville, people that I know. Beverly Hills reminded me a lot of like Belle Meade and like older corners of Nashville when we were driving through some of the neighborhoods of Beverly Hills. I was like, man, I feel like I'm back in Nashville, like Belle Meade and West Meade. It felt a lot like it. But it was Beverly Hills. It's fine. It's a very, very rich part of LA, but it's not that impressive. Anyway, Michael, thank you for coming on. This has been a blast.
Yeah, this was fun.
Let's plan on doing part 2. And then maybe even Axel F as we get into the summertime.
Yes, looking forward to it.
I'm excited. My mind has been changed on the film. Only I think I like it more after talking to you, and your love for it has become contagious, and it makes me want to watch it again. It's a movie that if I'm scrolling through HBO and it's on, and I'll catch the last half of it, I probably will.
This is one of those ones where it's probably on more than you realize it on TV, whether it be one of the movie channels that you pay TNT or whatever. Yeah. And it's one of those ones where if you've seen it, you could step into the movie almost at any given point and be like, okay, and you just watch it to the end. It's kind of like Shawshank Redemption was on TBS. Like it was on multiple times during a day, but you could catch it. Nobody ever saw it from the beginning. When it was released, they just caught it like an hour and a half in, but there was still an hour and a half to 2 hours left of the movie. Yeah. Like it's kind of the same way with this one. You could step into it at any point and be like, okay, I know where we're at.
It was a great length. It's about an hour and 45 minutes. It was a very, very good film, worthy of all the acclaim and the money that it has made. Michael, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Video Oblivious. And stick around, another new episode with a different movie is just a few days away. Thanks to my guests for being a part of the show. And if you'd like to be a part of the show, send me an email, zbennett@gmail.com. That's zbennett@gmail.com. Maybe there's a movie you love that I've never seen. Send me an email, we'll connect, and we might even talk about it here on the podcast. And don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, whatever your platform allows. Give us a good rating if you really enjoyed this podcast. And thanks again for listening to Video Oblivious.